Hey everyone, La from TGL. Just finished another episode of the Back and Forth podcast, a ping pong chat about logistics. This episode we feature Pete Mento, an ex-colleague and friend of mine. He's currently the head of commercial for Wayfair, a US-based publicly traded company that deals in the big and bulkier items for their customers. A super interesting business model. A bit more about Pete himself. He is an ex-merchant marine officer. A very colourful character. He loves his rugby and he loves his beer. Him and I have had many pints of beers together in pubs where he was actively seeking to have a pub fight, or in good humour. So Pete is probably one of the most intelligent freight nerds I have come across in this industry. He always has a lot to say about some of the most important subject matters, but not in a mundane, boring way. He's a colorful individual, as you will see. I try to cover a wide variety of topics, and I failed miserably. But what we did manage to cover, Pete brought a lot of color and personality and insight, and most importantly, I only wish that I had digged a little bit deeper into some of the subjects that we discussed. Invariably, when you have such a banter going on, you start shooting off different tangents, and that chewed up a lot of time. But nonetheless, what we did have at the end was brilliant, because, you know, anytime I talk to Pete, I always learn something, and I always come out with a massive grin on my face because he's just that entertaining. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. See you on the next one. I want to welcome everyone to the next TGL podcast, Back and Forth, a ping pong chat about logistics. Today, I have a very old friend and ex-colleague of mine, Pete Mento, who I used to work with at C.H. Robinson. And my first encounter with Pete was, I believe, at one of our global conferences. I believe this was at Minneapolis. The Twin Cities, and in true fashion, you know, traditionally we start our first day and then we go and the evening we'll go and celebrate or drink, and everyone usually gets quite messy. And of course, it's a 7:30 a.m. start the next day, and then you go through these mundane PowerPoint presentations or whatever you want to call it. So suffice to say, everybody was quite under the weather by day two. And I recall Pete's session came up at about, I think it was just after lunch, about 1 or 1:30. And in comes burly Pete, you know, like his thumb is probably thicker than my arms. And he came in while everyone was really red-eyed and under the weather. And it started talking. And sure enough, within the first 5 minutes of his spiel, everybody was sort of prepped up and listening. And he went on, did maybe about, I think it was about an hour worth of presentation. It was probably one of the most entertaining presentations, or let's just say conversations, that I have ever participated in. And that was my first exposure to Pete. How someone could make a logistics presentation sound so entertaining. He was a magician at it. So I'm very, very happy to have you, Pete, and I really want to thank you for your time. And I know the time difference over there. You're over in Boston, right?
I am, yeah. I appreciate that, man. I really do. You know, you got Mark Hong and I in Australia, in Sydney. You picked us up. I had spent a week and a half with him in Asia at that point, and you know, Mark's from Minneapolis. He's Korean heritage, you know. And he had been dragging me all over Asia. I was so tired of eating Chinese food, and I get to Sydney, and we went out the day before. We had a really good time out drinking beers, and next day we go out, sales calls, all that good stuff, and I'm like, great, Australia finally. You're gonna have some real good Australian food. And what do? You take me to this wretched Chinese restaurant for dinner, and it was every type of awful seafood imaginable. It was I think you were picking fish out of the tank, and I never wanted to beat two men more in my life than that night. And you kept me there for hours. hours eating all this Chinese seafood in somewhere in Sydney. I was so mad at the two of you. I just wanted pies and, and beers, and it was so disgusting.
I recall the first pub I took you to was just the one at the Rocks down the road. It was Fortune of War.
The Rocks, yeah.
Yeah, and you were just so happy to be in an Australian pub.
I was.
Having a
Yeah.
pint of beer
Yeah.
or a schooner of beer, you were so happy. And here I was, trying to talk shop, and you just looked at me and you go, La, I just want to get drunk and get into a bar fight. And I'm like, dude, this is not Crocodile Dundee, man. This is
yeah. I just want to talk about rugby and drink beer, man. You don't understand. Yeah. If you ask me one more question about customs, I'm going to start the bar fight with you. Yeah. We had such a good time.
Yeah, it was fun.
And the pie place you took me to, I can't remember the name of it. That
Harry's.
was by the Army base, I think.
Harry's.
Oh, God, I have dreams about those pies. Oh, they were so good. They were so good. Oh,
well, you're welcome back to Sydney anytime, Pete.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. My youngest son is playing Division I rugby in America now. He is a massive beast of a boy. He is 6'5". He weighs 270 pounds. He's playing Division I college rugby. He's incredibly good, and he wants to come play in Australia. And I said, you can go play anytime you want. Just take me with you, buddy. I'm gonna put on 50 kilograms of beer fat and watch you play, pal. I'm all in.
Yeah. We don't get many 6'4" rugby players. Full stop. Yeah. You know that, don't you? So if he comes and plays, he's going to be a gigantuan beast of a human.
Yeah, he's like the biggest ape man you've ever seen, bud. Well, you're like the tallest Chinese man I've ever seen in my life. It's like you and Yao Ming. I didn't even know, like, the first time I met you, this is our guy from Australia. Like, he's a super tall Chinese guy with an Australian accent that doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, but there you were. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been way too long since
it has been over a decade. And just for our listeners, Pete is very, very active with all things compliance, US trade related, macro geopolitics, all that. So all wrapped into one. And he's very active on LinkedIn. And I highly suggest everybody look him up and look at some of the work he's put out and follow him. So Pete, you are now at Wayfair. I know we just spoke previously before we pushed the record button, and as I understood it, Wayfair is this e-commerce platform tackling an area which Amazon have not yet dared to go ventured forward with, which is the big and bulky stuff. And as soon as you said that, it would, the penny dropped, and it made total sense. I think correct me if I've got this right or wrong, but that's how I see it. You guys are the Amazon of bulk and ugly, I guess.
Yeah, big and bulky. I mean, let's face it, right? There's a reason why those of us in the freight forwarding world would always quickly say no to personal shipments, right? You don't want personal effects. Furniture breaks, home goods break. It's fashion. So even the smallest nick, damage, ding will ruin the value of the shipment. So a lot of the stuff is also relatively inexpensive because it is considered a fashion merchandise. You buy it because you want to keep it for a short amount of time, change it over as people's tastes change. And then on top of that, you have the other side of the spectrum where it is horrifically expensive. And you're moving these very expensive things that are very heavy. A lot of times we have divisions of the company that are entering into people's homes to set things up. And you can imagine how complicated that is. So I'm in the side of our business. It's a division of Wayfair called Castlegate Forwarding. We're a non-vessel operating common carrier. This year, we're going to move somewhere in the range of 140,000 40-foot ocean containers on behalf of just our suppliers. So although we are a freight forwarder, we don't do it for anybody but our suppliers. The idea being that by lowering the transportation costs, we make it more profitable a sale on our platform. So we're not really in this to make a lot of money, which is great because it's not really competition for guys like you, and it's not really a competition for the ocean carrier. It's really just us acting in the best interest of ourselves, our customers, and our suppliers, and trying to be as efficient and trying to come up with as many innovative ways of getting them into our system as possible, so that our customer has the best experience, the most cost-effective experience, and hopefully the fastest and the best way to get it there without any damages and have it available. The pandemic was brutal, absolutely brutal on inventories. And the fact that this was set up before that happened really put Wayfair in a great situation to be able to provide product for its customers. And it's funny, when we were first talking, you said, well, I've never heard of Wayfair. And as an American, I was like, you haven't heard of Wayfair law. But I mean, and then I realized, wow, we're not in Australia, and then you and I had this conversation about the geography of Australia, which you're positively correct. I mean, you're a coastal country, and the idea of doing what we do in Australia absolutely gives me night terrors. Trying to think about managing the logistics of what we do in your country would be a nightmare. So I'm glad that we're not there right now, because this job is hard enough.
Yeah. Well, I've tried to touch it many times, and each time I fail miserably, and it's just not something that's worthwhile. You simply do not get the return on your dollar invested. More and more I try, but again, at the end of the day, Australia needs more population, right? The problem here isn't that we're far away. The problem here isn't the country is big. The problem is we don't have enough people. There's only 6 million of us, covering a landmass not too dissimilar to the size of USA. So with that, you come through lack of infrastructure, lack of satellite cities around the countries. There's only a few, and so I think when Amazon first launched in Australia, it took them many years to just get to the current stage of distribution with the small parcels. And they didn't launch on time, if memory serves me right. They didn't. They actually, the first couple of years of their planting their flag, they had a lot of dramas, and it was not popular. And I'm pretty sure even today, with some of their packages where they're offering these cheap shipping prices, I'm pretty confident they're losing money. I just cannot see it, how they can be making money. So again, Pete, welcome to Australia. I'd love to see you again, but again, come here with caution.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say there's just not enough Australians. It's the same thing with Canada. Well, it's the same thing all around the world. I used to say this at my speeches, and people would say, "Shut up, like you're wrong." But the population, this idea of overpopulating the planet, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Okay, we're not making enough people. So, like Australia, when I came back from Australia, in the times that I've spoken to Australians in particular, I say, you're basically one big giant Texas with much better beaches. That's what Australia is. Like I grew up in Texas. So Australians are these extremely friendly, outrageously warm people who are intensely proud of where they're from. I've met very few people with a nationality who are as warm and inviting, and at the same time willing to smack you if you say something negative about where they're from. Like you can say, as an Australian, you can make fun of where you're from. Like you can be as anti-Australian as you want as an Australian. But as an American, if I talked smack about Australia, you would all come out of the woodwork to break every bone in my body. And that's very Texan. You're very funny, and you're very big and bombastic, and big personalities. Now let's get past the funny part of it. Massively rich in all kinds of raw materials. Huge export economy. all kinds of great import opportunities that abound. You really desperately need more people because of the number of jobs that are there. Infrastructure problems abound. You have a lot of interior resources that you've got to bring to the exterior of the country. Sounds a lot like Texas. You have tremendous problems with regards to your environment that make it a lot harder for you to deal with those interior issues. I could just keep going, but beyond all that, the Australian economy has always fascinated me in that there's so much to do. You just need more Australians, which brings me to my second point. Very attractive country. I don't know why you can't make more of you. You think like you guys would get around, you just put on some romantic music, get a little tipsy, and just make more Australians, right? You need some more romance in that country and just start knocking out Australians, man. I don't get it. Very attractive people.
We're
You'd
too
think you
busy
just make a whole
drinking
lot more
beers and
Australians.
but we're too busy drinking beers and
Bar
starting fights
fights.
in pubs, mate.
Yeah. I don't know. Charismatic, very charismatic, very charming people. I don't understand why you're not making more. It's like Canadians. I mean, the world's population is, and you'll get back on economics. China has a 3 children policy now, where they're giving tax breaks to families that are willing to just make larger families, because they're realizing our population is decreasing at an alarming rate. Women do not want to marry. They don't want to have more than one child. There are far too many men than women. They've never really allowed for an immigration policy, and they have certain cultural issues that make it difficult for them to have people who are not of Chinese descent marry people who are of Chinese descent. And they're not seeing people of older ages who've never considered marrying having children deeper into their lives. So their population at 1.4 billion is probably going to top out maybe at like 1.6. And then from there, slowly begin to decrease. India will likely be the world's most populous population. And then they too will begin to decrease, because this idea of large agrarian families is not going to happen. So Middle East, Southeast Asia, certainly parts of South America, they'll have that same increase. And then boom, they're going to go down too. The earth is not going to become oversaturated with human beings, because technology is allowing us to not have these gigantic, massive population centers. There will be centers of populations, but there will still be parts of the earth that will not be overrun with people. So that creates very interesting logistics problems of its own. Who knows? We could have another pandemic that will be worse than this last one.
Yeah. Well, do you find that I've always said that looking at how it's great you sort of touched on technology and how that's transformed the way we live, but more importantly, it's given us a window into the rest of the world, right? The the freedom to travel, or the cost of travel, has significantly reduced. People are a lot more mobile than ever. Instagrams of the world, the Facebooks of the world, allows us to see and endeavor we want. So if you really think about it, thinking back to my earlier decades, like we didn't have that exposure. So you were somewhat still a bit more contained within your own country. But as the decades rolled on, more and more people becoming more and more international. And before you know it, by the time you hit 30, you still haven't got maybe, you still want to hit another 20, 30 countries. So people have a lot more ambitious goals
Yeah.
when it comes to their personal experiences, or to become more worldly. And that is taxing on childbirth, right? And
Yeah.
so, because we all become, let's face it, we've all become more selfish because we want to spend more time exploring and live our lives. And rightly so. But then the tax part of that is going to be, well, you're not going to have kids. Whereas before, my parents and the parents before that, they had nothing to do, right?
Well, yeah, and it goes way beyond that. Like, so my grandfather, so my father's father, they're Italian immigrants, and they came from Sicily. So, well, actually, my grandfather heard me say Italian, he'd be very angry. They're Sicilian immigrants, and my grandfather was the youngest of 13 kids. 13. Like, did my grandfather do anything but have sex and eat? Like 13 kids, man. Like, he worked, he ate, and he had kids, right? And my poor great grandmother. I mean, that's a lot of kids. And a big part of that was they operated their own business, and he didn't hire labor. he made labor. That's pretty much where that came from, right? And then my mother, who was adopted, and you know, she had a big family of her own. That I believe she had 11 brothers and sisters when all was said and done through adoption and all the rest. It was common, you know, Texas cattle ranchers. You had to have kids, man. I mean, you know, what are you going to do? You live out in the middle of nowhere. It's not like you can go on whatever hire.com and say, I need some ranch hands. You got to knock them out, right? So it was just part of the way that the world works. And we look at ourselves now. Kids are an expensive hobby, man. I mean, I got 4 of them, and putting 4 kids through university in America, you're gonna have to donate some kidneys to make that happen. So it's a trade-off, you know. And when you think about the cost of living in the part of the world in Asia or in the Pacific that you live in, Australia is a horrifically expensive place to live, let alone raise a family. And we were talking about that before we started. You know, the cost of living in the Pacific, in Australia, New Zealand, in Japan, Singapore, you know, you go all through that part of the world. You're paying for that view, my man. You're paying for those beaches. You know, there's a lot of money that goes into that, and the logistics of getting things there on top of it. We should probably get to logistics. We're already like 15 minutes into this. There's a tax that goes into living in paradise. Here in America, we have Hawaii. You know, I love going every time I can. But when you get there and you pay, you know, whatever, you pay $3 for a candy bar, and you know, a carton of milk to make your cereal in the morning is almost $5 US. You say to yourself, yeah, it's paradise, but I'm gonna go broke in a week and a half if I stick around here. And I can remember when I was there in Australia, people had less collateral crap in their life. And that was the function of realizing I don't need as much of this junk because I don't have as much to spend on it. And I think that might not necessarily be a bad thing. And the challenge of e-commerce in America right now is we are endlessly being told that we need things that we don't necessarily need, and we're making it way too easy to put it in people's hands, my friend. Way too easy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, US, you know, every time I go to the US, I'm just astounded that each and every family has at least 2 cars.
At least 2 cars.
At least 2 cars. Whereas in Australia, having 2 cars is a luxury, right? Like, oh, you've got 2 cars sort of thing, you know. So there's a difference. And you've got what, 50,000 different kind of peanut butter as well.
Oh, isn't it great? Yeah.
But this is why we need America, because you guys are the biggest economy, right?
Yeah, we're the world's single largest economy. You would have to take the next 5 largest together to get a consumer economy the size of the United States. If you took every single credit card in America and you stack them flat on top of each other, they would go 38 miles into space. Wow. If Americans buy more crap that we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like in the first place than any other country on planet Earth, roughly 21% of all consumer spending in America happens after our first major fall holiday, which is called Thanksgiving. So November, the last Friday in November until December 25th, Christmas Day. So 21% of our consumer spending happens in roughly a 1-month period. And that's generally done during our highest religious holiday that now most Americans don't believe is real. So we have this massive holiday built on excess. And I was talking about this the other day from a logistical standpoint. That one holiday, which we're about to enter into, you know, and it's this massively disruptive logistics event that we call peak season, you know, on the Asia side of logistics, creates this export event where it's all hands on deck to have every single empty container we can find to stuff, to go into these ports, to load onto these vessels and get the hell out of Asia as fast as we can, right? And then on the US side of things, it's this event where we do everything we can to have every hand on deck to accept these vessels, load it in, and then have a cleared warehouse space, cleared rail space, and have everything ready to come into the country, turn that thing around and get the hell back out to get back into Asia because we have to get ready for Lunar New Year. I mean, it's just this never-ending cycle where we're dependent on each other's moments of excess. Now we have Singles Day in China, 11/11, which is this, I mean, let's be very honest. It's a manufactured holiday where people are just sort of buying stuff for one another because they don't have someone in their life. And we're buying things. The Chinese have, God bless them, they've created a moment in time to just consume.
Well, China,
It's
do you
madness,
agree
man.
that China now is probably more capitalist than communist?
Oh, well, they have, man, they've cracked the code, you know. I mean,
Yeah,
for a bunch of communists, they've got this capitalist thing down pat, man. Like
yeah.
they've figured that stuff out. You know, when I was a boy and I first started going to China, and you know, you'd walk around Shanghai. It didn't look like Shanghai does now.
No.
It didn't. China didn't look like Shanghai does now. Like, you know, you're a teenager walking around Shanghai and you're looking around. It was there were parts of the city, you know, there are parts of Guangzhou and, you know, parts of Shenzhen that looked like a major city. But now, I mean, these Chinese cities, they don't just rival Western, they surpass Western, like they're technological marvels these cities are. And the wealth that people have, you know, I remember my friend Brian Wolfram, he's at JC Penney now, and Brian's hysterical. Like, Brian calls himself the international party goer because he's, you know, he's constantly traveling for vacations. I don't know where he gets all his vacation time. He loves Australia, by the way. But he happened to be in Shanghai at the same time I was. I think he was negotiating rates. And we were both in Shanghai. And I said, let's go out tonight. And do you remember Jack Chang with
Yeah,
Robinson?
Jack Chen. I
So
just recently
yeah,
spoke to him
Jack,
as well. Yeah,
did you? Yeah. So
yeah.
Jack was over there too. And I think he was still living there for Robinson. And we all met, we had some drinks, and we were at some club late at night on a Saturday night. And it was mostly very young, very affluent Chinese people. And they were just dripping with money. Like, you know, the $50,000 wristwatches and the next to impossible to find kicks and the, you know, the super expensive denim. And I mean, everything was like just Gucci and Louis Vuitton. And it was big money. And, you know, there I am just looking like a out of work high school gym teacher in my crappy clothes. You know, I never felt older and more irrelevant in my entire life. And just these, you know, super attractive, like really upwardly mobile young Chinese people who are like, who's this pointless old man? You know, I mean, and I kind of just said to myself, I wonder where all this money came from. And then I remembered back when I was a kid going to China, these are probably either young tech millionaires, because a lot of them could be somebody who came up with a great piece of technology. They could be young business owners who caught on, you know, the tail end of a great business opportunity of growth industry. They could just be fortunate young people whose parents made a crap ton of money. You never know, you know. But if I were to go to LA that same night, or Manhattan, or Chicago, or Miami, I'd see the same thing. Or if I was in Paris or London or Milan, you know, I'd see the same thing. So the Chinese are in their own moment of, you know, beyond that bourgeoisie sort of, they're going to have to come to grips with that rising tide of wealth. And I think it's going to be harder for them because in America, as an example, there's an expectation that every single generation below you is going to have an opportunity to do better than you did. And I don't know that China has that feeling. You know, I mean, in Australia, is it like that in Australia? Did your parents expect you to do better than they did?
Um, well, I mean, I come from a Chinese family, and Chinese mothers always expect you to be better in everything, right? So that goes without saying. Before I was born, I had expectations laid on me.
Yeah.
Um, but what the thing is, it's very interesting. You speak of the younger generation, and I think a lot of these young folks. I mean, no doubt, there'll be plenty that's going to be very well educated. You know, they're going to be educated abroad. They're going to be you know, intelligent folks. But it's also this excess, I fear, that's going to do a whole generation of young Chinese more harm than good. And I think if you look at some of the behavior of the Chinese government in terms of it silencing some of the, the Jack Ma's of the world, it's already sending a signal out saying, you can be wealthy, but don't flaunt it because we'll cut you down, right? And right, and because they don't want that to be spread, because let's face it, right? I mean, now we're gonna, it's so hard today. I was thinking about what we were going to talk about this thing, and I was going to say, let's stick to logistics, don't touch politics, And a few decades ago, it would have been an easier feat, but today, politics and every industry is just
It's
so
much
intertwined.
harder.
It's very difficult for you to
Yeah.
comment on one thing without the other, right? It's just
Well,
anyway. So
let me give you a great example of that. So right now in America, our president is struggling with a big political problem. All right.
mm,
And it's politics, but it's not politics. So his really big problem right now has to do with these tariffs that America has put on Chinese goods. All right. So when it was first done, the reason for the Chinese trade war, and most people don't realize this, but the main reason for the US China trade war were all these tariffs. They're called 301 tariffs. It wasn't about trying to bring manufacturing back to America. All right. And it's not about trying to put a bunch of taxes on Chinese goods just to be baddies. It was about the theft of American intellectual property. That's what all of this was about. It was about America standing up to the idea that allegedly, Chinese companies were through the joint venture program, where most American companies have to work with a Chinese joint venture corporation. And while they're working together, whatever IP is developed during that joint venture, the Chinese company has the right to use on their own. And a lot of that intellectual property ends up being spun off into individual Chinese companies without, there's nothing that American company can do at that point. And many times the sole intellectual property that the American company brings in that this Chinese company did not develop ends up being spun off and used, allegedly, right? So this happens with all companies, Australian companies, it happens with European companies, Japanese companies, Korean companies, and it causes a problem. So America, under the Trump administration, said enough's enough. We're standing up. We're doing something about this. And they put a series of tariffs in place. Some of them were onerous, 25% on key industries that came out of China. And the Chinese got upset, really upset. But what was strange, law, Americans didn't. Like Americans, the typical American consumer didn't even notice. Like if you went down the street from my apartment right now and you stopped 100 Americans and you asked them, what was the amount of tariff that President Trump, they'd be like, man, I got a better chance of telling you, what the atomic number of uranium is. Like they don't know, like, and they didn't even know why it happened. And then on top of that, if you ask most noticeable, like notable trade people in my world, did you get hit with tariffs? And they'd be like, oh yeah, I did. Can you tell me what harmonized tariff code specifically your company got hit with? They'd be like,
nope.
Can I say tomorrow? Like they wouldn't know specifically. So it's this kind of a thing where only deeply dyed in the wool dorks like me really know what happened, right? So billions of dollars of tariffs, very disruptive and really bad for the relationship between the US and China.
Yeah.
Really bad. So the president now is being told by his advisors, we really want to bring China back to the table. We were super close to having an agreement that was going to export just hundreds of billions, like $250 billion worth of American agriculture to China, and all the good stuff, pork, wheat, sorghum. I mean, it was going to be awesome. Good for American shipping, good for China. And China was going to buy all this stuff. And then we were going to open up the American financial markets. We were going to start to build natural gas terminals to export natural gas instead of the Russians. Boy, wouldn't that have been really useful right now? There's all this great stuff that was going to come from it,
Oh, man.
Yeah, right. So, and so they're saying to him, here's what we need you to do. Maybe you just drop a couple of these levels, just 4 of them. So maybe like list 1 and 2. And so President Biden is saying, yeah, maybe I should do that. And China's like, yeah, Great idea. Maybe you should do that. It'd be really good for our relationship. Um, but he's being told by everyone the worst thing you could do right now is look soft on China. The worst thing you could do right now, while the Chinese are basically propping up the Russian war machine in Ukraine, is make it even easier for them to trade with America. The worst thing you could do right now is give your Republican, our conservative party in America, is give them another talking point to make it seem as though you don't have the best interest of American manufacturing at heart. The worst thing, the worst thing, the worst thing. And it becomes not a economic or a logistics conversation. It becomes a political one. So in all of my, my many podcasts that I do and all the trade school that I do every week and my conversations work, I try to say, we can't change politics. La Chang and Pete Mento have absolutely no voice in Congress. And I don't know if you've got the prime minister's phone call, in Australia. I don't think you do, because if you did, you'd probably call him drunk at 2 a.m. I know I would. And Joe Biden won't return my phone calls or emails. So I'm not getting through to anybody. But all we can do is come up with pragmatic solutions to deal with it, buddy.
So here's a question then. And this is going to sound a bit broad, but when did America, it sounds like to me, when did America become a country with a scarcity mentality?
Okay. Yeah. So during that there's only enough for, yeah. Okay. So the attitudinal change, 54% of the money on planet Earth is in the hands of the US population, which makes up about 5% of the people walking the earth. So that's crazy, right? And for the longest time, we were able to drive economic policy through our trade agreements. That changed dramatically when the global economy became truly global. And that really started in the late 90s when the internet began to interconnect markets. And when the internet began to interconnect markets, transportation companies saw an opportunity to serve these international markets in a more efficient way. A lot of that was led by small package companies who were able to seize on that by interconnecting, various nations. And then companies like the ones we work for were able to really efficiently, through consolidation, bring smaller market companies to the globe. And over the course of the past 20 years, we've gotten so super good at it and so efficient that we were able to take these processes that we had and layer technology on top of it. Well, if you and I wanted to right now, you and I could go out and we could buy an operating system from any number of companies, CargoWise, right? You name it. And we could put some money. Well, CargoWise is Australian. They're damn good. And we could buy a system, and me from America and you from Australia, we know any number of people in Asia. We could start a freight forwarding company tomorrow. I could take my customs house brokerage license on the wall right there. We could start importing into America, and you could call somebody over in China, and we could start importing into China. We could be a global freight forwarder in a couple of days, right? We have moved from the complexity of freight forwarding being this massive, paper chase and bureaucracy and labor intensive and capital intensive to, it's gotten so good from a process standpoint that we can buy off the shelf software to digitize it for us like that. And if you have a couple of good relationships and a couple of phone numbers, bud, you can get it started. Here's the rub. America, for a long time, we had the world cornered on consumption, and we had the world cornered on infrastructure. And we fell asleep at the wheel when China built better infrastructure and began to encourage consumption. We fell asleep at the wheel when Europe began to build better infrastructure for trade agreements and began to evangelize around the world that they wanted to find ways to work with people to build better infrastructure. And we never, ever thought that people would trust China to be a good partner for trade. And they did. And China came through with their promises for a lot of people. And then We took our partners for granted. We took Canada for granted. We took Mexico for granted. We really took Europe for granted. When the Soviet Union fell, we did not build a better relationship with that part of the world when we could have. We could have turned India into the most important manufacturing and technologically innovative economy on the planet. But instead of investing in that and investing in their infrastructure, we invested in them financially through corporations, which was great, but we didn't invest in them as a government to help them build port infrastructure, to help them build the infrastructure through their highways, which we could have done in the early 90s and radically changed that country. We're starting to do it now. We should be ashamed of ourselves for what we didn't take the chance to do then. And now we find ourselves way behind China, who's been, through their Belt and Road Initiative, basically colonializing the world, which is what they've been doing. Now, we're America. We did that for a couple hundred years. So, but you can look at where that is now. And we find ourselves on the back foot where we have no merchant marine. Asia has it all. I mean, I don't negotiate. When I'm negotiating for all the space right now, I'm not negotiating with any American companies. I'm negotiating with Taiwanese, Chinese, Korean, and European companies for the most part, buddy. So are you. We are infrastructureless. All we have is consumers and banks, bud. Consumers and banks.
So here's going to be a big question to sort of tackle. So we all know the effect of COVID that's had to the supply chain, right? We're not going to cover that. I'm sure both you and I, we've done so much content on that. We all know what has happened and transpired in the last 2 years. Right now, there's this massive camps, divisive camps between, talking about the after effect or the hangover from the COVID highs or the COVID drunkenness, and which is causing market chaos right now, right? Be it Main Street or Wall Street. Even the experts at the central banks, let's face it, not all of them have done things correctly. And to be fair, not many of them actually had to grapple with this type of challenges before. So in the midst of this economic reality that we're currently facing, and then with the continuing push by US of, with the situation in Ukraine and Russia, with the fighting stance with China, let's call that for what it is. Fighting stance. Do you see all of this as just a massive coincidence, or do you see there to be any sort of interaction or connection or
Well, I don't think that there's any intent, for where we are today. I think that I don't want to believe that the world is that awful. My stance on this has always been the same. The world is chaos, and here we are in the middle of all of it, trying to make sense of it. And for anyone to orchestrate something so horrific as where we are now, it would take a whole lot more work than I think anyone could be capable of. And just the way that things just keep falling apart whenever we think that we're just so close. I was feeling so damn good, Law. I was getting so excited, because I was feeling like the West Coast port strike really, it's probably not going to happen, and it's still looking pretty good, right? And oil prices are starting to get pretty good, and then COVID shutdowns in China. What are you talking about? I'm like, Shanghai, no, like the ports are shutting down and no one's going to work. You got to be kidding me, right? And I'm thinking that's going to turn everything off. Consumption is going to be off in China. That's going to cause a recession. And then Russia invades Ukraine. And then I'm like, and then I said, don't sanction Russia. Don't do it. I know everyone's going to feel good about it, but in doing so, you're going to artificially ruin the oil market and you're going to jack up gas prices everywhere. I know you're trying to do something good here, but in reality, it's going to backfire. You're only going to help the Russian war. Like, don't do it. And now we're talking about this artificial price level that we're going to do, where everyone's going to promise we're not going to buy oil at a higher price than this. No, all that's going to do is make oil expensive everywhere else, but in China. So they're going to buy China and India are going to buy oil at a lower price when they're still going to buy it from Russia. Like, people don't seem to understand, right? I was so hopeful for everything. And it just keeps, the next thing just keeps happening, man. It keeps happening.
It's just a constant, the way I see it, it's just a constant pattern by the powers that be, we call our leaders, that it's a constant knee jerk. I mean, look, we are also part of the system. It's a constant knee jerk and reactionary type of steps that we take that keeps on getting us into trouble, right? So we see ourselves in a state of fishtailing, right? Swinging from one extreme to another, whilst every major economy or market or leader, whatever, they're trying to finesse it so the fishtailing stops and we don't go jackknifing the whole thing, but it just keeps on fading. Like you said, every single step that US have taken against the Russia conflict with the sanctions, with the taking them off SWIFT and all of that, and as well as keeping their money, which, keeping their central bank money, which is, I guess, it's the cardinal rule of you don't do sort of thing. That sends a very powerful message for the very wrong reasons to the rest of the world, be it ally or foe. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's one of those things. Is anyone thinking about this sort of stuff, or are they just simply knee jerking to everything that's happening?
I don't know. Hey, here's another way to look at it. I don't know how many politicians you've met, but the ones I've met can't even order lunch together in less than an hour of arguing. So the idea that they all get together and they can find some way to, to coordinate all this stuff just seems incredibly unlikely to me. But we live in a time of such extremes and such overpoweringly dark and difficult and impactful and awful things happening around us. I think that the ship is in such difficult waters. There's going to be overcorrections. With the place that I'm at is I've never felt more incredibly fortunate to be American, and my American friends are doing nothing now but complain. I'm super lucky. I was a merchant marine officer, as you know. I got to travel on ships, and then being in our business, we've traveled so much, man. You and I are friends in this business. I got 4 kids, right? I've got my daughter, and then the woman I love, I'm marrying finally. She's got 3 of her own. I've raised them like my own. I love the hell out of them, and they haven't gone anywhere. They haven't seen a damn thing. And they think that the rest of the world must be better than here because they don't know any better, right? Well, I've been everywhere. I love this country. I got to see, people like you and friends of mine who were stuck in Australia and couldn't go anywhere. And right now, one of my dearest friends who was living in Europe, who's from India, her son lives in Bondi Beach. And this is the first time in 2 years that she's seen her son, man.
Yeah.
2 years,
Yeah.
I could not go 2 years without seeing my kids.
Yeah.
It would break my heart.
Yeah.
So I think about what that must have been like for everyone there and how heartbreaking it was. And, never made me be happier to be an American than that. And I can't imagine the suffering and how difficult that must have been. And, it's going to change how we look at everything. What happened at COVID, when you say in the post-COVID world, it's going to change how we look at finance. It's going to change how we look at logistics. It's going to change how we look at everything, purchasing, our way of life, how we look at the resiliency of our supply chains. How we look at everything is going to change beyond what just happened there. So I'm glad I'm at the end of my career, and I'm not going to have to solve all those problems because I'm not smart enough. and I don't think I could stay sober enough to come to a conclusion on it. So I'm glad that younger guys like you will be handling it and not older guys like me.
Okay, well let's get to some uh, pretty straightforward business. So for US in the space of the next 6 months, or for the rest of the year, let's face, what do you see as the market conditions to be? What do you think
Oof,
of the strikes?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
what's going to happen
Oh yeah,
in the
man.
US of
Yeah,
A?
here comes the lightning round. So I don't believe there's going to be a strike. I think we're probably going to avoid this. So we'll roll the tape back here and see if I'm right. But so much there's so much pressure politically from both sides of our political spectrum, right? So from liberals and the conservatives and the White House to say this would be a knife in the heart of the global economy, not just the American economy, that they're under a lot of pressure not to do anything. So that's first. I think that you're going to see continued downward pressure on ocean rates, particularly to the west coast of the US, because people still, as much as they want to believe there's not going to be a strike, people are like, you know. So you're seeing stuff in the spot market. Today's the 30th of June when we're recording this. You're still seeing spot market rates into the west coast like $6,300, $6,200, Chinese base ports into Long Beach, and you might see those come down even farther. Beyond that, generally those are forwarders who are seeing one carrier rate. I don't know how reliable that capacity is going to be once people begin to get, it's like a 2-week rate too as well. So we'll see what comes up with that. I think as the capacity begins to get a little more comfortable with what's going to happen with that strike, it's going to tick up a little bit. But what I'm really excited for is some kind of comfort where people are going to say, right, no pork strike. I think this is about where we think energy prices are going to be for a little while. I think that we believe that we're either in a recession or the recession is coming. So we know how the Fed's going to react, the Federal Reserve Bank in America. Here's where interest rates are probably going to be. And you're going to see some kind of stability in rates. You're going to see, $7,000 to $6,300 somewhere floating in there for West Coast. You're going to see that 75 to 9,000 on the East Coast floating in there. But it's going to be something that we can characterize as this is about what we think things are going to be. You're going to see dray rates in Europe and in the United States be something that's a little more realistic. You're not going to see this pile of empties in the US that just don't go anywhere. They're going to send loaders over here to get them and bring it back. What I do think you're going to see a lot of is canceled sailings. And I think you're going to see a lot of blank sailings because these ocean carriers have really gotten used to making great profits, and their shareholders, they're not ready to give that up yet. So I think that no matter what happens, 23, 24, that stability will remain, and they're going to try to keep, I don't think we're ever going to go back not ever. It's going to be a while before we're going to go back to the reasonable rates that we're used to, because these carriers are going to work to maintain ranks, to keep rates at a level that their shareholders and their families and themselves feel is reasonable. But you and I both know, man, it's just going to take one carrier, one of these major carriers to say, I got a shot here. I'm looking at these guys, and I could probably take this whole lane. Like I could probably corner the market on turkey. Let's do it. And they drop the rates by $2,000, and then it all falls apart. So it just takes one carrier to wreck it, and someone's going to get greedy eventually. And I joke all the time. Freight forwarders, logistics providers, we are an opportunistic bunch, and we are greedy. We like to make money, and sooner or later, someone's going to break rakes. That's just a question of when. So we'll wait around for it. And when that happens, man, all bets are off. It'll be the Wild West again, and it'll be fun working in this business again. The other side of that, though, man, I think air freight's going to suck for a long time. I think it's going to suck for a a long, long time. There's no pilots, there's no space, there's no aircraft. This war's screwing everything up. Jet fuel's so expensive. I'm so glad I don't have to deal in that marketplace. I mean, it's got to suck for you right now. Air freight's got to
Yeah.
be awful.
Well, right now, down unders and also New Zealand, we're having a massive demand for air capacity and charter flights for the milk powder sending over to the US. So,
Yeah, that's awful.
yeah. So there's a lot of demand on capacity, which there isn't any, and people go, oh, why aren't there any more options? And I say, dude, New Zealand's a small country, right?
Yeah, yeah. What do you want from me, right? Like, you want me to go in my backyard and build you one? I don't have anything. It's really it's a supply situation. It's a
Yeah.
capacity problem. I can't get you anything else. So people just don't get it. I've never understood it. Yeah.
So inflation, recession, stagflation. Which camp are you in, and how far away or how long away do you see your beliefs to come to fruition?
I think that we're going to find out, right? Because you don't know if you're in a recession until you see the numbers. I think we're going to find out that we're already in one. I think that the recession will be a relatively short one, probably 12 months. And I think that the US government, from our end at least, is going to do everything that they can in their power to jam us into it quick as they can so that we can get out of it as fast as we can. And it's unfortunate because that requires us encouraging unemployment. It requires us encouraging people not buying homes. It's sort of like shocking someone's system into having a heart attack to reset the rate of their heart. And that's sort of where we are. So I think it's going to be brutal.
And how is the American public responding to that?
And we're oblivious. That's the thing most people don't understand is that most Americans don't pay attention to any of this. They're all happy to be making, more money than ever before, but they don't realize it buys less than it ever has. So, they're all excited to be like, oh, look at all the money I'm making, flipping burgers at Dairy Queen. But then they complain about how much gas is, but they don't realize they're spending 40% more on chicken breasts and milk, and everything is more expensive, and the rent is going up. The rents are so expensive right now, and houses are unaffordable. And those are the sorts of things that are not going to come back down once this recession is over with. People are going to get used to making that kind of money on housing, on cars. Now, other things in that market basket, like food, of course, will probably come down a bit. But people are going to get used to making those kinds of profits, and they're going to expect to make them deep into the future. So, like I said, I think about a year of the recession, but I think part of this inflation is going to be here to stay, man.
What's your view on the China COVID zero policy?
I hate it. Oh God, I hate it so much. But I think, a big reason for it is this is their way of having something to blame for what is essentially their economic problem. So, they can say, it's not so much market conditions that are caused by political decisions. It's more, well, what do you want us to do? We had to deal with COVID. We're a massive country with a lot of people who are on top of each other. The last thing we want to do is a massive loss of life. We do what we had to do to keep everyone safe. It just so happens we also had serious economic pressures that happened to happen at the same time. Go ahead and try to prove it was one and not the other. And it's a fair point. You really can't prove it wasn't one or the other. So, masterstroke. Well done, Mr. Ping. So, yeah, tip of the hat to him. Hate the game, don't hate the player. He won that round, so you got to give him credit.
Well, thank you so much, Pete. And I know on some of the topics which we just barely touched on, and we're tackling massive icebergs here, and there's so much conversation to be had. But really, really enjoyed what we did have, and appreciate your time very much.
Oh, come on anytime. You just let me know when you want to do it, buddy.
Will do. Thank you, Pete.
Anytime, pal. See you.
Cheers, mate. Take care.
Right,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Think Global Logistics.